3, 2, and 1. We're continuing our coverage in your local election headquarters, and now we are in Normal talking with David Paul Blumenshine, who is running for state representative here within this area. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, this is your second time going for this particular seat. You've been really particular on the conversation of term limits. Your opponent within the Republican primary, Dan Brady, has been in office for 19 years now. What would be your biggest point against people being able not to have term limits, or for term limits, I should say?
Okay, so he started in his 20th year, and of course there's a whole background behind that with the state pension and how legislators are paid out, 12 and 20 years, 35% of their pension, or 35% of the years they serve at 12 would get them so much money, which is 35%, I should say. At 20 years, they get 85%. So why do I stand on term limits? Because 92% of the voters in McLean County in a non-binding ballot initiative in 2018, in November of 2018, said they would like to have term limits. And that's who we're here to represent, right? The people. That's what they want. I believe in term limits because of what government has become. Career politicians have created most of the problems we face today. And that's why I'm adamant about it. I'm also adamant about fair maps. I think we need fair maps.
Well, speaking about fair maps, there's obviously conversation again about creating fair maps within Illinois. We have a census that's coming up, and so that's going to be huge in determining the districting within central Illinois in particular as well. What do you think has been the holdup on getting fair maps done at this point, and then how would you contribute to making that become a reality if you were elected?
So political gamemanship, obviously out-migration or people moving out of the state has also caused or put cause for a need to shift districts. We'll lose a congressional seat. There's some people are saying it's going to be the 15th district. What will I do? I think the key to it is that both parties have to come together. Now, that's pretty tough to do in what is considered the most legally corrupt state in the union. And anytime you're dealing with corruption, who's it in the best interest of? The parties, right? The parties like to continue to maintain power. By shifting districts, obviously you might upend that, which gets back to the career politics or term limits.
I want to ask another question about term limits.
Okay.
What would be your suggestion on how long a person could serve? Are we looking at 2 terms? Are we looking at 3 terms? What would be your cutoff to say that's too long? Okay.
So the House cycle is 2-year term, right? I say 4 terms for a House representative. And then when it comes to the Senate, obviously a different breakdown. So I would say 2 terms for state senators. It would fall in line kind of with the President of the United States. 2 terms, right? If you don't like the President of the United States, he's not going to be there any longer than 8 years. You don't like a U.S. congressperson or a U.S. senator or even a House representative or a state senator, they could be there for, like Michael Madigan, 48 years.
So 8 years will be your cutoff?
8 years is what I self-promote. That's what I put on myself. I hope to possibly be out of there before 8 years. Getting back to building the bench and finding somebody. If I find somebody that I believe is a better candidate than myself, I'm going to get behind them, endorse them, and help them walk this journey.
You mentioned out-migration a few different times. It's been well documented that Illinois has a lot of people who have been leaving the state, one of the higher rates within the country of people who have been leaving. What would you attribute that to, and what would be your solution to stopping that and bringing people back into the state?
Okay, so yeah, since 2000, well over 1 million people. That's what's caused us to fall behind Pennsylvania as the 6th most populous state rather than the 5th. What has caused out-migration or people moving out of the state, without question, you're dealing with taxation. You can't tax people to death. And that's what's happened to us here in Illinois. We're in not only a debt spiral, but we're also in a tax death spiral. Until we put a moratorium on taxation and spending and get things back into a manner of fiscal responsibility, balancing budgets year after year, it's the last 6 years, consecutive years, we've led the country in people leaving the state. How long can we withstand that? Because when those people leave, we lose revenue, tax revenue, right? And some people say that's upwards of $5.9 billion a year is what it's costing us. So is that sustainable? No.
So how would you balance? I know that you were a part of the debate led by the McLean County League of Women Voters recently, and I think you were quoted in saying that you would cut taxes and you would freeze taxes and you would lower spending.
Yeah.
How does that work in terms of getting the budget deficit back up? Because you would imagine, you might cut taxes, but how does your process work as far as your formula for balancing the budget?
Well, so it gets back, a lot of people would say, so what do you plan on doing about it? What is your forward-looking growth plan? I don't put that all upon myself. There are very talented people out there worldwide in the financial markets, in state government, in the federal government, who understand how to keep government accountable. And that's who I would link arms with. Yes, I'd like to see a moratorium on taxes and spending. A big part of that is there's things that I absolutely believe that we cannot cut as far as spending.
What would those be?
Well, that would be the most disadvantaged. Those people who need services the most. That would be cruel to cut, spending from groups like that. However, the governor came out last year and said, and it hasn't come to fruition, that he was going to cut some of our social service programs, for the elderly, for the disabled. Absolutely not. That's not something that I would even give consideration to. However, what I would give some consideration to is every line item. We have they say, upwards of 8,000 units of government in our state. Just in the school systems alone, it's close to 850 public school systems. The drain that currently happens, because government has just swelled, and it continues to swell as we spend more money, right? The more we spend, the bigger government gets. I always give the example of Florida. Relatively speaking, they have 1,650 units of government. We have almost 5,300 more units of government. They have 6 million more people. Why isn't we cannot consolidate a lot of the units of government, all the way from the state level down to the township county level? DuPage County ended up, and I hope I have this number correct, I'm going to take a shot at it, but they did 4 units of government in DuPage County, and they ended up saving somewhere in upwards of $200 million a year. That's what, if we did that at 102 counties, we wouldn't even be having this discussion. I probably would be endorsing whomever was holding office, because now we've done what I think the people want. The people don't want to serve government. They want government to serve them. And that's the way it's supposed to be.
Is there anything that you've identified that you think is excess? I mean, just like you said, you would not cut for the disadvantaged, the people who need it. Mm-hmm. Is there anything on the opposite end where you're like, that is an example of excess?
Yeah. So I would say the public school systems, and I'm not talking about the classroom, I'm not talking about teachers. My wife's 31 years teaching kindergarten in District 87. We don't allocate enough funds for the classroom and teachers. Where a lot of the funding for education goes is into the bureaucracy of the public school systems. With over 800 school districts, I mean, that comes with a lot of pork. I mean, you've got bureaucracies, you've got superintendents, you've got assistant superintendents, you got regional superintendents, you've got a whole plethora of people involved in the process, and then going into what is the biggest drain right now on, or the biggest part of our debt that we face, it's the pension crisis. And a big part of the pension crisis is the TRS, Teachers Retirement Services, system. Yeah, I mean, that would be number one. The 800 school districts, we have 102 counties, 800 and something school districts. A lot of states run with a county-based school system. How is that achievable? Like I said, you know, we have good minds out there. Let's put them to use. We know what's wrong. That's obviously something that we are faced with every day, and it's reported every day.
You mentioned corruption
Yes.
Several times. It's been a huge point that you continue to bring up. What actually can be done, in your opinion, to ending corruption? Obviously, there's several investigations that are happening right now. Mullings by several lawmakers on both sides of the aisle about doing things to address. Realistically, what more can be done to stop corruption within the state of Illinois and its lawmakers?
Yeah, yes, that is a big question. And there's not an easy answer, right? You know, they talk about ethics reform. They talk about the revolving door, you know. They talk about people like Speaker Madigan, whose law firm actually is negotiating assessed values of downtown Chicago buildings when he is hooked at the hip with the Cook County assessor. So the assessor assesses the building. Speaker Madigan's law firm goes ahead and negotiates what that should be, and then he gets paid. Well, obviously, is that a conflict of interest? By all means. So I think there's a four-prong approach to ethics reform. The revolving door, not being able to legislate on issues that you benefit from, which would apply to that example. So, yeah, I mean, there's so much special interest money that's involved in politics. You know, who are they truly representing when most of the money comes from either PACs or corporations? You know, are they governing necessarily for the people of their district, or are they governing, or are their votes being bought and paid for?
Last question I have for you, just for you to tell people why you believe you should be the person they will vote for in the primary.
Well, I'm the person that they should vote for because, once again, I've want to walk this out. I want to self-impose term limits. I'm not taking a state-funded pension, which would be a lifetime benefit if I were to achieve so many years in office. So I know that that's where it starts, being selfless. And truly looking out to the generations, because once again, this isn't going to be solved overnight. It's going to take as many years that it's taken us to get here. I'd say about 19, 20 years. You know, when Representative Brady started in office, we had a $4 billion deficit. That now is in excess of $250 billion, you know, in 19 years. So what can we do if we started now? What can we do for our children and our grandchildren to make sure that we don't burden them? And that's why I'm going to Springfield, is for the future generations, for the future Illinoisans, and hoping to stop, or at least slow drastically, people leaving this great state. We have a beautiful state. We have one of the best interstate systems in the country. We're in the crossroads. Agribiz, we're second to none. There's nothing like it. Chicago is a great city. Unfortunately, it's one of the most corrupt cities in the nation. And finally, we have good people. And fortunately, we still have some of those good people around here. And so that's what I want to go and do, is cultivate that.
All right. Well, David Paul Blumenshine, running for the 105th in the Republican primary for state representative. Thank you so much for being here. Best of luck to you.
Thank you, Eugene.
Absolutely.
Take care.